Good afternoon, colleagues. This is meeting number 123 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts for Monday, December 10th, 2018. Today we are in public, we are being televised, and so I would encourage you in the audience and around the table today, if you have a cell phone or any kind of communication device, just to mute it or put it on vibrate, please. We're here today in consideration of report number 7, compliance activities with the Canada Revenue Agency of the 2018 fall report of the Auditor General of Canada. We're honoured to have with us again today from the Office of the Auditor General, Mr. Jérôme Berthollet, the Assistant Auditor General of Canada, and Mr. Martin Dompierre, Principal. And from the Canada Revenue Agency, Mr. Bob Hamilton, Commissioner of Revenue and Chief Executive Officer, and Ted Gallivan, Assistant Commissioner, International, Large Business and Investigations Branch. And so we welcome you here, and we will turn to Mr. Berthollet at this time for opening statements, and then we'll go into questions. Thank you.
Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie de nous...
Chair, thank you for this opportunity to discuss our Fall 2018 report on compliance activities of the Canada Revenue Agency. Joining me at the table today is Martin Dompierre, who was the principal responsible for the audit. Part of the agency's mandate is to ensure that taxpayers comply with the income reporting requirements of the Income Tax Act. The agency aims to protect the integrity of the tax system by identifying and deterring those who do not comply. We found that the Canada Revenue Agency, or the CRA, inconsistently applied tax rules when it audited or reviewed taxpayers' files, even though the Taxpayer Bill of Rights requires the agency to apply the rules in the same way to taxpayers in similar situations. There were a number of reasons for these inconsistencies. In some cases, the judgment of agency staff conducting compliance activities resulted in inconsistent treatment of taxpayers in the same situation.
In conducting compliance activities, it had the discretion to charge interest and penalties to the taxpayer or to waive them. We found that some of the agency's auditors waived interest and penalty for the time it took them to get information from the taxpayers' banks. Other auditors charged interest and penalties because they considered that time to be the taxpayer's fault for not providing the information. These discretionary decisions resulted in inconsistent treatment of taxpayers in the same situation. According to the agency's own internal audit, the agency waived penalties and interest differently, depending on where the file was processed. Moreover, staff from different program areas considered different criteria for similar situations when granting requests for taxpayer relief. We also found that the agency waived $17 million in interest and penalties, despite the fact that the taxpayers were identified as at risk for non-compliance and were undergoing an audit at the time they asked for relief. We found regional inconsistencies in file reassessments. Taxpayers in one region waited an average of 7 months longer than those in another region for the agency to complete an audit. In one region, the agency took over 40 weeks to process a taxpayer's request for an adjustment, whereas in another region, it took 12 weeks. We also found differences in how the Canada Revenue Agency treated taxpayers, depending on how the agency classified them. The agency had different compliance programs for individuals, small or large businesses, and taxpayers with offshore investments. Because each program had different compliance procedures, not all taxpayers were treated consistently. For example, the time the agency gave a taxpayer to comply with a request for information and whether or not the agency offered the taxpayer some relief from penalties and interest depended on the type of taxpayer. Chaque année, l'Agence du Revenu du Canada.
Each year, the Canada Revenue Agency sets targets for additional revenues from compliance activities. For the 5-year period we examined, we found that the targets increased each year and were almost always met or exceeded. This may mean that the targets were set too low. At some point, targets should be harder to achieve and should start to decrease if the agency's compliance activities effectively promote taxpayer compliance. Nevertheless, the agency could not explain why its targets continued to rise and were always met or exceeded. Finally, we found that the additional revenue the agency reported as a result of its compliance activities did not reflect the taxes actually collected. This discrepancy occurred because of its calculation of additional revenue. The agency measured results only partway through the revenue cycle. Therefore, results from additional revenues did not take into account the taxpayers who filed objections with the agency or who appealed through the court system.
Successful and therefore did not pay the taxes in dispute. In other cases, the agency was unable to collect taxes because the taxpayer was unwilling or unable to pay, and the agency wrote off the taxes owing. Without accounting for objections, appeals, and write-offs, the agency's calculation of additional revenue was incomplete. We are pleased to report that Canada Revenue Agency has agreed with all our recommendations and that it has prepared a detailed action plan. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. We would be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Berthollet. We'll now turn to Mr. Hamilton, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to appear today in front of the committee in my capacity as the Commissioner of Revenue and the Chief Executive Officer of the Canada Revenue Agency. Je suis accompagné.
I am accompanied, as you mentioned, by Mr. Ted Gallivan, Assistant Commissioner of the International Large Business and Investigations Branch. Today, I would like to speak to you about the Auditor General's Fall 2018 report that considered the compliance activities of the CRA.
In response to the Auditor General's recommendations, I'd just like to provide some very brief context around the increasingly complex environment in which we are operating at the CRA. The scope of our compliance activities from one case to another varies greatly, from audits of large multinational corporations to reviewing or validating an individual Canadian's T1 tax return. In each case, we structure our activities to promote awareness of and ensure compliance with the laws we administer so as to uphold the public's trust and confidence in Canada's tax system. The level of effort required to complete a compliance activity depends on the case and its level of complexity. Our workloads vary from region to region in terms of their complexity and the sectors that they represent. We need to recognize this variation as we look to implement the changes to improve our compliance efforts. Audits of sophisticated high-net-worth taxpayers, for example, can require that the CRA resort to court action to obtain the necessary records and information from taxpayers and their representatives. Given the complexity and potential legal challenges, these audits can take much longer to complete, which gives CRA time to collect the evidence needed to ensure sophisticated taxpayers pay their fair share. Et le contexte dans lequel nous travaillons se complique lorsque...
The environment becomes even more complex when tax schemes cross borders. In fact, a significant compliance challenge for tax authorities around the world has been addressing the effects of base erosion and profit sharing.
With other countries on better exchange of information and through partnerships such as the Joint International Tax Force on Shared Intelligence and Collaboration. In relation to the detailed management of our audits, reviews like the OAG's provide important information for the agency on areas that require more of our attention to better serve Canadians. Mr. Chair, the Auditor General's Report 7 examined how consistently the CRA applied its compliance activities for various types of taxpayers across Canada, as well as how the performance indicators for compliance activities were measured, monitored, and reported to Parliament. The Auditor General made recommendations in the areas of consistent treatment of taxpayers, timely processing of reassessments, and performance measures for compliance activities. The agency agrees with these recommendations and is undertaking concrete actions to implement them, while recognizing the differences in our compliance issues and challenges across the various taxpayers with whom we interact. Mr. Chair, the CRA's action plan, a copy of which was provided to the committee, identifies how the agency will implement the Auditor General's recent recommendations. The action plan also outlines our approach to review the CRA's internal processes and procedures. The CRA has committed to acting in all areas identified by the Auditor General within 18 months and at no additional cost to government. For example, the CRA is taking steps to provide information to Canadians about timelines associated with audit activities, as well as developing guidelines for seeking court orders to compel sophisticated taxpayers' cooperation, developing clear guidelines for the administration of taxpayer relief provisions, and establishing guidelines to determine delays attributable to the agency as opposed to those of the taxpayer. And these are a few examples of what we are proposing to do. Since I became Commissioner a little over 2 years ago, I believe the agency has demonstrated that we follow through on our commitments following Auditor General reports. The agency is realigning its operations and approaches consistent with the recommendation in the Auditor General's Fall 2016 and Fall 2017 reports.
For example, based on the Auditor General's Fall 2016 report on income tax objections, the CRA took steps to improve the timely processing of objections. As a result of these actions, the CRA has reduced its inventory of regular objections by 25% since September 2016.
2017 report provided recommendations to improve the service to Canadians offered by CRA's call centres. Since then, the CRA has focused its improvements on modernizing technology, increasing agent training, and updating service standards. These updates led to Canadians having improved access to call centres. For the 2017 T1 filing season, 74% of calls were answered, 45% by an agent, 29% by automated service, compared to 37% for the 2015 tax filing season. We are making progress in these areas, and we will continue to focus on improvements. And Mr. Chair, the same attention will be paid to the recommendations made in Report 7. We will take similar concrete steps to address these most recent recommendations. Mr. Chair, as I mentioned earlier, CRA recognizes the value of audit in providing information and insights that are enabling us to improve our service to Canadians. To this end, we have taken steps to improve our practices through our own internal audits, which the Auditor General just referred to, by implementing comprehensive and systematic self-assessments to identify strengths and areas for improvement within the agency, and promoting a service culture across all areas of the agency to better serve Canadians is a high priority for me personally and throughout the organization. And service includes our compliance activities, where we are putting an increasing emphasis on education and fostering long-term compliance in addition to our enforcement actions. I know there's still more work to do in regard to the CRA's compliance activities, and the CRA has been actively pursuing and investing in improvements in recent years, including a focus on improved data, analytic tools, and a risk-based approach. For example, as the Auditor General noted, the CRA took steps to expand its business intelligence as a means to detect taxpayers who posed a higher risk of non-compliance. We will continue to explore ways to provide our 6,300 auditors with additional tools and resources to assist them in their important work. And what this means is that increasingly the CRA is able to identify taxpayers involved in tax evasion and aggressive tax avoidance, both domestically and internationally, and to ensure that those who choose not to comply with the law face the appropriate consequences. And these efforts, at the end of the day, will help ensure that Canadians have trust and confidence in the fairness and integrity of our administration of Canada's tax and benefit system. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I welcome any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hamilton. We'll now move into the first round of questioning. It's a 7-minute round, and we'll go to Madame Mendez, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci à vous.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you all for being with us today about this OAG report. I'd like to start with you, Mr. Hamilton, notably in terms of this idea that agency has with respect to average taxpayers, and they focus more on them than on companies who are avoiding paying taxes. We know that there have been sizable investments on behalf of the Government of Canada to investigate and audit people who try to avoid paying taxes. So I'd like to ask you, and perhaps Mr. Dompierre as well, what efforts have really been made to capture the people or companies who are trying to avoid paying taxes in Canada? And we have to fight this impression that the CRA is only focusing on the average individual taxpayer in Canada. Mr. Hamilton. Thank you for your question. I'll start my answer, and then I'll ask my colleague to provide more details. It's a very important question for us. It is an impression that people have. They think that companies can avoid paying taxes, whereas individuals or small companies cannot avoid paying taxes. It's important for us to look at these two situations. First, we have to make sure that we ensure that Canadians can have confidence in the tax system, that everyone's paying their fair share of what is owed. So it's very important for us to make sure we uphold the integrity of our tax system. And there are two things we're doing right now. We focus a lot on international global companies. We work with our partners in other countries throughout the world. And we have more auditors and tools to provide better information with regard to efforts we're doing for large risks. Another thing that's important, we have to have a good conversation with heads of companies. We have to have awareness and conversations to make sure things go well in the long term. It is necessary to strengthen our actions, of course, but we are starting conversations, and we're making an effort to say what we need and why we need this information, and we also explain a bit how our tax system works. So my colleague could add something if he wishes. Thank you, Chair. We focus on coverage, results, and what the OAG has noted. In terms of the coverage, I can say that for the 1,200 multinational companies who file taxes in companies, we look at 100% of them. We look at what they're doing, and all of these high-risk companies are audited every year. Second, in terms of results, the OAG, in 7.2 of its report, said that there was an increase of 60% over this audit period, and a 4.6 billion additional income that was generated over that period. So there are people who try not to pay GST and avoid other types of income tax, and there's also overseas tax evasion. So we look at this. Audits, complex ones, take more time. So the Tax Act even recognizes that these files are more complicated. So usually it takes us 3 years to take for these audits, but at another 3 years, even double the time, it can take when revenues are generated outside the country or when we have overseas trust companies. So sometimes it can take 3 years more to do an audit because the Act itself recognizes that these are much more complex files. Mr. Dompierre, did you want to make any comments on that? I won't comment on that. I think they clearly described their process and the time that they need to complete an audit.
Between what is an audit and what is a review, because I think that is also something that is not quite clear in the minds of most people who read about taxes. And does that cause that impact that you think that, you know, everyday citizens are penalized because they are given much less time to produce documents or to produce proof of something than a company or a small enterprise? Is that something that causes that issue, Mr. Chair?
I can certainly say, from my perspective, it's a contributing factor. I think that oftentimes people can use the two terms interchangeably, a review versus an audit. But in our world, there's a process of verification and review whereby, you know, a taxpayer sends information to us and we just check that information. Could be against a third-party source, against another piece of information that we have. And that can be a relatively straightforward exercise compared to an audit, which is much more in-depth, probing into, you know, particular books and records to make sure that we understand totally what's going on. So those are two different things. One, understandably, can take a longer time than another, and it can contribute to a perception of how much of a review or how much of a burden that a small enterprise or an individual has. But at the same time, I don't want to diminish the fact that it is something that we are thinking about whether we have the right risk process in terms of where we focus our activities. And there is something to be said, certainly at the small individual end of things, that could we move towards a world where we're putting a little bit more emphasis on education. We have a liaison officer initiative, try to get compliance right from the start and not have a process where something gets submitted and then we have a conversation afterwards. So it is an area that I think we're sensitive to, both in terms of substance and impacts on taxpayers, but also with respect to perception, as you mentioned in your first call. But this issue of review versus audit is something that is probably something we need to better explain to people. Again, what are we doing, why are we doing it, and how do these things differ?
Hamilton, thank you. Ms. Mendez, we're a minute over. Mr. Kelly, please.
Thank you. And thank you to the Auditor General for this report, and to the Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner for appearing here to answer our questions. There are, and for all of you for your service to Canadians. There are a lot of troubling elements in this report. There are many things that I think many Canadians would be quite rightly concerned about, and I want to focus first on one that I think many Canadian taxpayers would find very troubling, and this is the discrepancy in time allowed for compliance, for the production of documents, and the discrepancy between what the report, what's categorized as individual Canadians, people that are filing a T1 general on behalf of themselves, versus other categories of tax filers. So I think I'll maybe go straight to you, Mr. Hamilton, and I'd like you to explain why an individual Canadian gets 90 days to produce a document, and if they fail to produce it, immediately get their benefit or credit, as the case may be, struck, and yet other categories of tax filers, including, it would appear, any with offshore transactions, are given additional time. Sometimes the agency did not obtain information at all, and the file was closed without any taxes assessed. Please explain.
Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I would say that as I read this report, and I read other items which say there may be inconsistencies across the agency in what we do, how we're treating different taxpayers, is something that we need to pay attention to, and we need to learn whatever lessons we can from the observations. I would just say in this area, if we have a deadline of 90 days, for example, to get records, which may be reasonable in most cases. But if a taxpayer finds that that is unreasonable, we also have the flexibility, if they call us, to come up with an alternative arrangement. So we can show some flexibility when we know about it. That's on the smaller end, if you like, the individuals. On the other side, I think it's just a fact of life for us that some of the complex structures, complex transactions that we run into in the international, multinational space are just going to take more time to get the information that we need to go through. And so that's a challenge that TED's auditors face all the time. So we like to think that we've built in some flexibility into the system to be able to accommodate where more time is required so that we can get to the right result. But it is something that we're taking a look at based on this audit about whether there's some room for improvement, something that we can do better to get a better result for the taxpayers.
Okay, the report left no question that there are inconsistencies. It didn't say there may be inconsistencies. It said that there are inconsistencies. So this isn't a matter of speculation, according to the report. And the report is quite clear that it's in the case of individuals as opposed to other types of filers. But I don't think anybody disagrees that a corporate entity or an individual or anyone with complicated affairs, that it may take more time to conduct an audit, that it may take more time to conclude an audit. But when you ask for a document, I'm sorry, but I do not find it acceptable that just because it is international that you would be given a longer period of time to comply. My answer would be that if you cannot comply with the law the same way as an individual Canadian, then your problem lays in your strategy of tax filing or tax management, not something that the CRA ought to roll over and accept as a reason. It's unfair to other Canadians who, when they get a letter from the CRA that tells them they must drop everything and produce something for you, that they do so. Getting on to the inconsistencies that we find, this goes to information, the types of questions that I'm sure all members hear in their constituency offices when they take calls from taxpayers. Where in some parts of the country it's taking up to 40 weeks, where in other areas it would take 12. I do want to focus on small business filers. I have heard complaints from taxpayers and from tax preparers about the length of time, and I appreciate you say that there's a reduction now in the time period for objections. What about simple corrections on small business filers? I've heard from tax filers up to 18 months now in some instances, just for a keystroke error, that type of change. Can you comment on corrections and what are our time deadline or time lines in that? And do we have regional discrepancies in corrections?
Mr. Hamilton.
Yeah. So I'll respond to that question for sure. And I think just on your previous question, to close the loop, I think looking at the timeframes for large, sophisticated taxpayers is something that we have committed to look at. Is there room for greater guidance greater consistency in that regard. And similarly, on the individual side of things, we are trying to take some actions, such as calling people if we haven't heard from them, to try to have more of a conversation and diffuse disputes before they arrive. So it is an area that we are looking at. On the issue of corrections, I think that in that space, there can be differences across regions, but the one point that we have noted in our response is that the workloads vary across regions as well, so that to the extent that one region is doing a particular national workload for the whole agency, or if they have very complex sectors operating within the region, you can see some regional variation. So I put that as a caveat on this whole thing, that as we look at it, we need to find substantively if we have variations, no doubt about that, but we also just need to recognize that we need to compare like with like, and that if there is a difference in a particular region for a good reason, we need to factor that into what we see. I would say on the area of how quickly we're processing reassessments, we have improved in that area. Last year, we experienced some delays for sure in processing reassessments, which was due to a combination of factors, one of which was a reorganization that we did within the agency that had a transition period. So we were slower last year. I think till now we've moved up to our service standards, which if it's in paper-based form for a non-complex case, we endeavor to get that done within 8 weeks. 80% of the time. So we're back on track. I'd like to see us go even better and faster. And certainly, as you say, for a very simple change, we need to make sure that those are finding their way into our system and processed as quickly as we can. So I think those are areas that we do continue to look at, again, as we try to make sure that we're providing as good service as we can to the taxpayers. But Ted,
thank you very much, Mr. Hamilton. We'll now move to Mr. Christopherson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for being here today. We appreciate it. Just starting off, Chair, I'd like to ask Mr. Hamilton if there was a particular reason why he didn't do us the courtesy of giving us a copy of his opening remarks.
No, there's no reason. Indeed, I thought that we had. So I certainly finalized them in time to make sure that you had a copy.
You thought it was done and it wasn't done?
I'm sorry?
So you thought it was done and it wasn't done?
Yeah. I'll find out why it wasn't.
Okay. This is your third time in the last little while. Your first visit wasn't very good. You made some reference to things you've done about it. Your last one was really good. You were the shining light in the whole example, and now you're back bad again. Really bad. Now we're mucking around with taxpayers' rights. So let's just lay the groundwork. On page 20 the Auditor General's report, audit objective. The objective of this audit was to determine whether Canada Revenue Agency applied the Income Tax Act consistently during compliance activities and accurately reported the results of its compliance activities. Conclusion, page 19. We concluded that the Canada Revenue Agency did not apply the Income Tax Act consistently during its compliance activities. It treated taxpayers in similar situations in different ways. The agency also did not accurately report the results of its compliance activities, and its reporting was incomplete. That's pretty much a failure across the board, Mr. Hamilton. And what's most troubling at all for me is what looks like a complete disregard for the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Now, maybe it's not that bad. I'll listen to what you have to say. But the evidence tells me that that's not a priority. And here's what I want to know. Now, I've got lots of stuff I can reference here, but I want to get straight to it. In things like a Taxpayer's Bill of Rights, you're at the top of the House. If anything, it was your job. It was to make sure that the rights that Canadians have are protected. And you failed. Why? Why did you fail in your personal job to make sure that the rights guaranteed in writing to Canadians were not upheld? Why did you fail Canadians?
I'll just address that head on. I think for the Taxpayer Bill of Rights is something that's very, very important to me and to the agency. And where we see an instance where we're not respecting it, we take actions to make sure that we do. And I don't consider it necessarily something that would be a complete failure. I see it as a challenge that we have to overcome, and that there may be cases out there when the tax system that we run with over 30 million Canadians, 40,000 plus employees, there may be examples where something happens that needs to get corrected, and I view it as my job to try to prevent those where I can, but when they happen, to fix them. And so when we talk about things like consistency and inconsistency, it's very important for me to disentangle that, to understand where it's comparing the same with the same, so that just because two people are treated differently or two corporations, that's not necessarily inconsistent because they might be in different circumstances. But if, as the AG referenced, if they're in similar circumstances, then they should be treated similarly. And I think that's what you see in the action plan that we put together, not only dealing with any inconsistencies that might be out there and trying to have systems in place that ensure that we get rid of all of those,
okay.
But also in our
sufficient.
reporting.
Thank you. No, thank you. I think that I respect that you attempted to answer that, but not satisfactorily, I got to tell you. Again, see, to me, I look at this report and I look at your obligations and I see those rights as being at the top and in the middle and at the bottom and going through everything. And I don't get a sense that you see it that way. What did the Auditor General say? You throw around easily inconsistent. The Auditor General, 7.22, our analysis supporting this finding that you didn't give taxpayers their rights presents what we examined to discuss the following topics: inconsistent timing given to responses to requests for information, inconsistent offering of proactive relief to taxpayers, inconsistent waiving of penalties and interest, different audit completion times across Canada, ultimately an incomplete processing of the results in terms of compliance activities. Fail. So what I don't understand, and you're still not helping me, is where is the filter or the lens where the highest responsibility you have to protect Canadians' taxpayer rights? Because remember, your outfit scares the hell out of people. So this really, really matters. So why, help me understand how we got to this point where you weren't applying those rights. Why is this not flagged by you or by the Internal Audit Committee? Why did it take the Auditor General to come in and do this report? Because my reading of this is if the Auditor General hadn't come in, you'd still be violating taxpayers' rights. So why wasn't that part, a big part, of how you managed the Revenue Agency? Why? I'm not hearing a clear answer, sir, and you're not saying that you failed. You want to defend that. So this is not going well.
Mr. Hamilton.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, let me say a couple of things. So first of, obviously a Taxpayer Bill of Rights is something that's front and center for us. I have a lot of obligations as the head of the agency in terms of generating revenue, being fair, but respecting the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And I guess what you will see, in my opinion, in every response that we have to what the AG has raised, where they have pointed to something, we've said we're going to address it. We're going to fix it. And I think I would even say, based on my experience here, we have, where the Auditor General has said something and we've agreed with it, we've taken action. We've stuck to our plan.
Well, why did it take the Auditor General, sir?
No, but let me, if I could just finish one thing. So that's a good thing. I don't want to let that go by without noting it. The other thing that I would really like to get to do more of is where we uncover something on our own. And we don't necessarily have to have the Auditor General come in. And I think there is an example here on taxpayer relief, and I think it's even referenced in the Auditor General's report, where we did our own work and we did uncover something that was perhaps inconsistent across the agency and needed to be addressed, and we looked at it more horizontally. And so that's the place where I want to be. Not only are we responsive if something gets raised with us and we correct it, but we also do a good job of uncovering those things ourselves in advance of somebody else coming in. But this is work in progress that we have to do. It's important for me in the agency to provide good service to Canadians, to respect taxpayers' rights, and to fix issues when they come to our attention.
I'm listening to you. I actually am. But I'm still not hearing, where was the taxpayer Bill of Rights before this report? I saw you hold up the paper. Is that all that happened inside the agency? Just held up the paper and then proceeded to ignore it? Where was the Bill of Rights in the management decisions, in your decisions, in all of the internal audit reviews? Why wasn't the Charter of Rights for taxpayers front and center long before the Auditor General rolled in? I'm not hearing that.
I think I can give you some evidence that it is front and center for us, and it was before. If you look at one of the key initiatives that we're undertaking in the agency is to provide better service for Canadians. And we have established a Chief Service Officer to help us look horizontally at all of the things that we provide to Canadians and to make sure that we are respecting the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights and all the other commitments that we have to Canadians. So we have been on a mission to try to improve service and to improve that kind of consistency and to prove places where we need to make sure that we're fulfilling the obligations and meeting Canadians' expectations on this Taxpayer Bill of Rights. So it is there, it's present in what we do, and it actually has led to us to make changes to provide a better service culture within the agency, institute a Chief Service Officer, and I'm very hopeful and confident actually that these are going to take us down a very good path to improve services to Canadians, which will put us in compliance with the Taxpayer Bill of Rights.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hamilton, and thank you, Mr. Christofferson. And I'm not sure that it'll make you feel a lot better, but we've just been told that it wasn't CRA's problem on the text for the speech today. It might have been with with our offices. So we apologize for that, and we want to make sure that we give them credit.
I apologize to you for accusing you.
All right. Now, back to the government side. Monsieur Massé, vous avez 7 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
You have 7 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the OAG and the representatives of this office for participating in the work of our committee. I know that the public servants who work for you, Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Gallivan, work very hard to support you with the questions that we may have. I am not a tax specialist, I'm not an accountant, but as a representative of the Public Accounts Committee, there's something that, well, several things that I found rather surprising, and my colleagues have mentioned them, but something that I noticed right away was the amount of write-offs or debt write-offs that have been done year after year by the CRA. So roughly, we're talking about $3.2 billion or $3.3 billion per year. There was a small decrease of from 2016 to 2017. But the OAG has said in the report in section 759, we noted that the CRA did not know all the performance results of its observation activities. The compliance activities were sometimes incomplete. So I'd like to know from you at the OAG, what led to this observation in 7.59? The information that was provided by the CRA, it was incomplete. I'd like to know more about that observation. Chair, when we look at 7.59 or 87, we have to mention that this was incomplete. There's additional revenue, and when reports are in public, amounts are in public reports, they do not factor in amounts that were not collected. In other words, this means there were write-offs and there were tax objections either that were written off either full or partially. So these amounts are not specifically subtracted from additional revenues. This means that if the CRA says that there's $500 million in additional revenues, if there were any write-offs or amounts that were not collected because of an objection, these amounts were not subtracted from that figure. Chair, this does not mean that the reports are incomplete. Thank you. Now I would like to talk to members of the CRA. And can you explain why, for such important information as debt write-off or evaluation processes, how come we cannot obtain clarity about this information, which is so important for us and also for Canadians? How come we cannot collect this information, which is so important?
Then Ted can elaborate, because it is an important point. I think the issue that's been raised is that when we put more resources into audit activity, for example, and we will say, well, we will generate $100 from those audits, and we give that figure to the Department of Finance, Treasury Board, and so we're very transparent about that. But there is an important element there, is that that's how much we might identify through the audit, and then a bunch of things can happen after that. It could be sent to our appeals division. Appeals could overturn it or not. It could be fought out in court. We might lose a court battle, and so we could lose some of that revenue there. And then at the end of the day, as you started your question, there's the amount that gets written off. That if somebody goes bankrupt or we can't collect that money for some reason, we don't get it. So you might start with that $100 at the beginning and end up with something less. And I think that we have been, well, certainly truthful in that, but one of the things that the Auditor General pointed to, and actually something that we've been working on, is how do we construct a better measure to explain what's going on to everyone. It's not always possible to trace from an individual audit, what happened and calculate it at the end of the day, but we do have some figures that we can use to make generalizations about how much we might expect to lose in a court case. So we're doing those calculations now, and I think the Auditor General was right to say it's incomplete information. We're looking to make it complete. There will have to be assumptions made, but I think we can provide a more complete picture of that whole spectrum, running from audit through to appeals, court cases, and collections. But Ted is in the middle of all this. Maybe I'll just ask if he wants to elaborate.
Si vous permettez, je pense que merci.
The answer you provided is acceptable for me. And given the expertise you have, you mentioned the 40,000 employees at the CRA, and that is the largest department at the federal government. So there is expertise to determine how you can recover funds, to be able to determine the scope of what could be perceived or what could be written off. So I'd like to talk about the write-off of debt. For me, it's important. It's $3.2 billion, and you are the largest department. But if we talk about debt write-off year over year, it's $4 billion year over year. So I'd like to know, does the CRA, well, obviously, depending on regulations and acts that govern it, but do we turn to you enough to recover debt that is contracted? Can we expect you to recover the maximum amount of debt? Because, Chair, I'd like to ask the CRA.
Round, and then this last one in regards to the
Mr.
debt.
Chair, I was satisfied with the first answer that Mr. Hamilton gave me, so I'm more preoccupied by my second question.
Okay, let's do the second question first, and we'll give Mr. Gallivan just a little time at the end.
Okay, thank you, Chair. On the second question, it is something that we're concerned about as well, of trying to maximize the amount of debt that we can collect. We always want to be fair with people in terms of particular circumstances, but if you look at it globally, the sort of $3-4 billion number that you calculated, we'd obviously like to take that number down and be able to collect more of the debt that is owed. We face some challenges in terms of taxpayers that may not have access to their funds anymore. They might be bankrupt. And generally, my sense is that well, time is not on our side in this, and so where we can move more quickly to establish the debt and take action to collect it, I think we're going to be better. So we're taking actions on that front. We're also involving some of the debt collections people in an earlier stage of the process with audit, so that we can have take that longer view, if you like, a more horizontal, comprehensive view of the audit to collection stage to see if we can increase our chances. There will always be some amount of debt that gets written off, but we're putting a considerable amount of effort into trying to maximize the amount we do collect. But
thank you. Very quickly, Mr. Gallivan.
Yeah. 2 points of clarification. The first is the debt write-off number there is not just for our compliance work, that's for all debts that the agency has. And when you put that in relation to the $460, $480 billion the agency administers every year, it's actually a very small percentage given that we don't pick our clients, we're not a preferred creditor. The second point of clarification relates to the difference between management accounting and financial accounting, and your question about the net versus the gross. The Department of Finance, in their financial statements for the Government of Canada, do take into account things like litigation, adverse losses at tax court. And so from a financial accounting perspective, this concern with netting down adverse outcomes after audit is taken into account in Department of Finance's financial statements. But as the Commissioner said, we need to do better from a performance management perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Gallivan. Yes. Mr. Kelly, please. Yes.
Obviously, there's just so much in this report that I think really to go on as far as questions and answers that Canadians need. But I want to quickly ask Mr. Hamilton to address something that he said in his opening remarks. You discussed the improvement or described improvement at the agency on its call center following the previous Auditor General's report in 2017. And this is the concern that has come up from people that have spent more time at public accounts than I have, people like Mr. Christopherson, who have been here for years and years, where we see issues that come up over time. And you said that you cited some statistics on improvement to the call center, and yet the internal audits at the CRA had failed to detect the problems at the call center, and in fact reported the opposite, that it had been functioning perfectly well, or maybe not perfect, but I think it was reporting an 85 or 90% call answer rate. And it took the Auditor General's report to actually establish that there was a horrific problem going on in the call center. So the troubling part is the internal audit, perhaps. And can you explain how we can take confidence that internally you are accurately measuring the improvement, so that we don't end up in a situation where 2 years, 5 years, however many years down the road, we have another Auditor General report that comes and says, no, in fact, that there is still the same problems that have already been flagged in the past.
Mr. Hamilton.
Yes, you and I have the same objective there. I'd like to be seen and to deliver on improvements that were flagged in the AG's report. Why would you have confidence? I guess a couple of things that I would say. We are measuring things very much in line with the way the Auditor General came in and measured how many calls are getting answered, not, etc. So I think we've adopted a methodology, whether it's perfect or not. I think it's understandable. I think it's pretty good. And I think it's consistent with what the AG said. So we're definitely not changing the type of measurement we're doing. So what we're seeing in terms of results of about 3/4 of the calls being answered in the T1 filing season is a marked improvement from the 37% we saw in 2015. So we're using a consistent measurement, and we're being more transparent. We're putting these numbers out there for people to look at. Now, they will go up and down, one week to the next, but overall, we've seen some improvement, and I would say that that's with the old technology. If you recall when we were talking about it before, this is very old technology we're using, and we're looking forward to the day we would have new technology.
Thank you. I heard that you have changed your methodology to be more in line with what the Auditor General did, so that was the answer.
So that's what?
That's great.
I would just say...
Very quickly, because his time is limited, so...
Well, okay, I'll let you...
So in response to the recommendation the Auditor General made following the aggregated tracking of the use of budgetary financing, you Your agency says that you agree, although it doesn't actually sound like you agree. It says agreed and then spoke about how the Treasury Board and the Department of Finance were already satisfied with your reporting methodology. But the point on this section on page 16 and 17 of the report is that the Auditor General, if I understood correctly, and also following his remarks when the report was tabled, say that there's no way to even track the efficacy of extra funds that the agency has received, and that's troubling. Can you address the issue around new funding and to actually track what new funding has been able to accomplish? And most of the new funding hasn't actually been expended yet, or hasn't been delivered yet. It's mostly coming in subsequent years.
Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions there. I'll leave one for Ted to elaborate on. But just in terms of we do agree with the Auditor General's recommendation. In fact, we had started some work on this ourselves, but this has given us an extra impetus to move it forward quickly. We do believe we provide the Department of Finance and Treasury Board with proper statistics. They're good, and as Ted said, they take those as being revenue earned by audit and factor it into their fiscal projections about what might come forward. So I think we're fine from that perspective, but we do agree with the AG that when they say that it's not telling the whole, it's incomplete, and that there's something that happens after that, and we are looking for a better way to explain that to people in a way that's not confusing but is transparent. So on that, point taken, and we're looking for something to do. I actually think it's an important exercise, not only to tell Canadians, but for us to understand better what's happening and how we can improve. On the tracking, we have actually spent a significant amount of money, of the new money that has been given to us for increased compliance. There's always a debate about how one takes that incremental amount and separates it from the rest. We believe we have a good methodology, but we're certainly open to looking at it in more detail. And I think on that methodology, maybe I'll just let Ted give a very brief elaboration.
So just quickly, the expectation was for the $1 billion we would yield 5. In the first 2 fiscal years, the lift was 2.6 billion. So, we saw that clearly that the value was going to be achieved. Our concern was when we were tagging individual files, we were worried that if we had 6 multinationals to audit, we would pick 2 that looked the most likely and give that to the RevGen group and give 4 to the not incremental funding group. And then you got this distorted behavior where people are trying to meet a revenue generation target, but the base goes down. And we could have found ourselves in a situation where on the billion for 5 billion, we would have exceeded, but our base funding that delivers year in, year out would have gone down. And then we would be in the awkward position of trying to explain to you, well, how is it that you got extra money for RevGen and you're saying you're exceeding on that, but your base program year over year is going down? And so what we worked at with Finance and Treasury Board is if we get 5% extra dollars, then 5% of our incremental results can be attributed to that. And that's what we worked at with Finance and Treasury Board. We tried to actually make it simple and to be more transparent to this committee and other stakeholders.
Okay, Mr. Bertolat, are you satisfied with that explanation and that answer? And also, can you maybe address and explain the difference between found and collected? So finding taxes is one thing, and collecting is, as we see in this report, is something different as well.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Very quickly, please. Mr. Dompierre.
So, Mr. Chair, the explanation that was provided, and then also Mr. Hamilton made a reference to that, is that they agree with the recommendation specifically, and we're looking to find other ways or other measures to accurately measure the money that's being collected through the new dollars that are budgeted.
Found.
Sorry?
Collected as opposed to found. You said 5 billion found.
I would say it's found. It's an estimate of what they anticipate specifically, Mr. Chair, to collect or identify as part of their compliance activity. Found, I'm not sure exactly. They will find that additional revenue. I think it's part of their own process to define specifically their own targets.
Thank you. We can come back to that if we have to. Now we go to Mr. Sarai, I believe. Mr. Area.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Hamilton, yesterday night at 9:23 p.m., my office received an email from one of my constituents. Her family is in bankruptcy. Her two children, Lucas, 10-year-old, Chloe, 9-year-old, they were diagnosed with autism in spring of 2017. So they made their first call to CRA in July of 2017 for the disability tax credit and the child disability amount. They were told that it will be processed. In fact, consistently through the story, the call center agents have informed quite well. They have performed quite well compared to the last time when we discussed the performance of the call center agents. That is not the issue here. So she contacted CRA, and CRA said they need a confirmation from the trustee, and the trustee did make a request for the retroactive payment to CRA in January 2018. February, the mother contacted CRA again to find the status of the refund. The agent told her refund should be sent by April 2018. Beginning of May 2018, nothing has arrived. She called CRA again. She was told reassessment and refunds were being processed and would be sent by June 2018. Again, June 2018, nothing happened. She called again. The agent at CRA told her that a check has been made at the beginning of June for around $12,000. This is a family that is in bankruptcy with two children diagnosed with autism. June, 12,000 check has been made and nothing happened. Again, she contacted CRA, confirmed the check was actually sitting with the accounting department. Then she was told by the end of July 2018 she will get it. Once again, she contacted CRA end of July 2018. She was informed it is still with the accounting department as they are just busy and should definitely arrive by September 2018. September 2018, money did not come. She called CRA again. In fact, the agent, she says, the agent was confused as to why it is still sitting with the accounting department. And she was told, call back in 3 to 4 weeks. Beginning October 2018, she called CRA again. This time the CRA agent informed it was still being held and that trustee needed to send a request, which was already sent in January 2018. Early November 8, 2018, she called CRA again. Agent had no answers and said they would send a message again to the accounting department asking them to release the funds to the trustee. She said she called CRA again last week and was told by this agent that everything was completed and a check would be issued soon. And if you don't receive it by December 28th, call back. The check is with the accounting department since 2018. As a member of parliament for Nepean, I do receive quite a number of requests from constituents. Some of the ones I don't worry about much. Last year I had a constituent whose income was in the range of $300,000 plus. He had a refund of about $30,000-$40,000 or more. I didn't bother much if there was a bit of delay. But since morning, this was one of the first email I read this morning, it has been paining me still. After this committee meeting, the first thing I'm going to do is call my staff and ask, were you guys able to process it? Why this? There is no review, there is no audit, there is no objection, there is no appeal. Why a check still with the accounting department that should go to a family which is in bankruptcy and whose children are diagnosed with autism?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So while I can't obviously comment on any specific taxpayer, that is a troubling story that you've told, and I would like the opportunity to go back and check into, what as you've described seems like a very inappropriate delay. And I don't have any answers for you here today, and I couldn't really discuss them in detail because of taxpayer confidentiality, but thank you for raising it, and I will definitely take it back and find out what I can.
Okay, I'll give you a little extra time, but you got to summarize fairly quickly. It's
No,
a 5-minute
I'm
round.
done with this. I got other questions, but I'm done.
We'll come back then.
Yeah.
Mr. Nuttall, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to representatives from CRA coming today. Mr. Hamilton, you have probably one of the hardest jobs around in terms of, there's not too many Canadians who love the CRA by verdict of what you represent, but that is what it is. It's a necessary thing to have, and you hopefully use all the tools you can to do the best job you can on behalf of the taxpayers with the taxpayers. The issue I think that we constantly face with CRA is one of legitimacy, credibility, and faith, in the sense that if you are tasked with essentially, and I'm going to use the word auditing because just for my own structure here, with auditing every single Canadian when the time's right, to determine whether they're following the rules intentionally or unintentionally, but you're unable to follow the rules intentionally or unintentionally yourself, it leaves a very difficult position for you as an entity, but certainly for Canadians to have faith in the process. And it's funny that the audit, as you go through it, you go, yeah, this is pretty much what I hear. And I get there's variability between regions, but I think we see those variances even within our own ridings. And it's very difficult as a member of Parliament to give advice, or our staff to give advice to individuals, because it's a constantly moving target. So how do you restore that faith? And I don't want the bureaucratic answer, right? Like the bureaucratic answer, we're going to do better next time, we're going to put the necessary changes in place that we've already talked to the Auditor General about. Like, there is such a deficit when it comes to faith in the CRA, and some of that's going to be there implicitly, but there's some of it a lot of it, that is being caused by this variance or bad experiences that have taken place, and the inability for the CRA to be able to govern itself without need of outside governance in terms of ensuring that the job is done right.
Mr. Hamilton.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I don't know if I would say it's the hardest job, but it's a job that has many rewards and many challenges. And one of the most important things that I can do, that we as an organization can do, is give people trust and confidence in us. Because we run a self-assessment system, it's extremely important for me not only to generate money that is owed and expected, but that people feel like everybody's paying their fair share, that we are auditing appropriately, enforcing, explaining ourselves, and being consistent as possible. Now, this report has certainly shown that we have to improve in the area of consistency, but we've actually already started to do a number of things to try to restore that faith and trust, because it's an absolutely critical part of what we do. We have increased our efforts on the offshore area. There's been additional money. We're also trying to make sure that we're being as clear in communicating what we do as best as possible. We have a service agenda, which is asking our auditors to not only collect money, but also think about the relationship that they have with taxpayers and be educating them talking to them, early interventions to try to get long-term compliance, and we're seeing some benefits in that. And each time that an issue gets raised with us, we're trying to change that service culture within the CRA to give people more confidence in us. Now, it is true that when we look over time, that in our public opinion research, that not everybody thinks we're doing a perfect job. So we've got miles left to go. But I don't think that we are just sitting around and saying the future is going to be bright. We are saying we are taking some actions right now, and some of them have borne fruit, and we expect to take more in response to either issues that we uncover or that the Auditor General or somebody else uncovers. But I do know, in terms of the tough job, part of the job, it's an agency that touches a lot of Canadians' lives. We have a lot of people that work at the CRA, and it's going to be a never-ending task to make sure that we operate with the highest level of integrity and give Canadians the trust and confidence that they need. So I take it very seriously.
We're out of time, Mr. Nuttall, unfortunately. We'll go to Ms. Ziep, please. Or Mr. Area. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hamilton, in budget 2016 and 2017, the federal government gave CRA an additional $1 billion, and expectations were that additional revenues of $5 billion will be generated over a period of 5 years. After I got elected about 3 years back, I was once discussing with one of the union officials. The numbers I heard were for every $1 invested in an auditor, if the auditor deals with an average Canadian $4 to $8 of revenues generated, if the same dollar is invested in an auditor who focuses on, say, offshore tax haven or maybe something on transfer pricing, the revenue generated will be much, much more, maybe in terms of $20 plus for every dollar invested. What is the numbers we are talking here?
I'll let Ted respond in detail to that, but I would just say that number of sort of 5 to 1, say $1 billion for $5 billion that you referenced in public documents, that would be the commitment that we make. If the Department of Finance gives us another dollar, we have said that we would be able to generate $5 of additional revenue through the audit. And I just want to make clear, as per our earlier conversation, some of that $5 could be reduced if we have appeals or court cases or can't collect. But that is the broad number that we have given and we have had publicly put out there. Now, what you're raising is for different segments of our auditing, how much would we expect from, say, offshore versus large business versus domestic? And maybe I'll just ask Ted to talk a little bit about that.
To give you a sense, both on the individual side, regular T4 tax filers where we send a letter and ask for evidence, and the multinational side, those are relatively high ROIs, 20 to 1. On the individual Canadian side, because the investment is relatively low, a stamp, a letter, some follow-up back and forth. On the multinational side, both numbers are high. Hundreds of millions of dollars coming in, but audits that can cost $2 or $3 million. Then you get into small and medium enterprises or offshore. Those are closer to 5, 6, 7 to 1. Small and medium enterprises, relatively costly, relatively low yield. What we're finding on offshore, that's only been a focus for 5 years for us, is that those are very litigious. Those types of taxpayers are resisting our audit efforts, and that's why the OEG talked to us about being more disciplined to going to court, because we're going to court during the audit with these taxpayers. And so there, the ROI is relatively low. And so what we have to do is decide how are we going to advance overall compliance? So coverage is a factor for us, ROI is a factor, but also the deterrent impact. And so very much we kind of balance all of those factors in making our resource allocation decisions. We don't blindly put all our money on the regular T4 filer and the multinationals, because that would let the underground economy or offshore thrive. And so we try to balance all of them to drive the kind of behavior that we want from taxpayers.
But I thought that this money was being invested by our government to strengthen CRA audit groups that were sort of weakened, I believe, before we came to power.
It's definitely true that the new funding didn't force us to make those choices. So in the past, if we wanted to ramp up the underground economy, we had to reduce other efforts. And so when we receive incremental funding from governments, it does allow us to expand in multiple areas. And so the money we got in budget 2016 and 17 allowed us to ramp up in the underground economy, where, for example, we're focused on BC real estate and those types of issues, and build our offshore capacity, and look at multinationals, and look at some what's called carousel fraud, refund fraud in the GST space, where organized crime are involved. And so we grew all four of those areas at the same time. But back to your question, the ROIs on those are very different. And if we wanted to maximize ROI, we would have invested it differently.
No, the four categories you mentioned, on an average, the ROI of 1:5 is quite low.
Again, I think when we were asked to produce those estimates, one of the concerns we had, for example, with multinationals, that's within my responsibility, I would like to see declining returns to scale. Just because today, with the number of audits we do, we have 20 to 1. If I do more audits, hopefully I'm seeing a deterrent impact, and so the audit issues identified go down, the taxpayers get the message, and I'm looking at less risky taxpayers. And so when we estimated 5 to 1, we were hoping that there would be declining marginal yields. But as you can see here in the chart, at the 7.2 that shows that we're up $4.3 billion in the last year that the OAG looked compared to the first year. That's a 60% increase with only a 5% increase in resources. And so what we're finding is better data, better tools are allowing us to identify more non-compliance more effectively than we were in the past. So the additional resources have given us the horsepower, but it's not just auditors, it's how those that $1 billion has also given us more data analytics, and we're using things like country-by-country reports for multinationals, CRS data that has offshore bank accounts from taxpayers, electronic funds transfers over 10,000. And so, you know, there is a strategy behind how the OAG is attacking this high-end non-compliance, and it's not all boots in the ground. A lot of it is advanced analytics and how we're using those analytics. So back to investments, it's really how we've made use of those investments. And I'd say, one, we've expanded in a number of areas at once. Two, roughly $60 million in IT builds, and better data is driving those outcomes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gallivan. Thank you, Mr. Area. Now we'll move to Mr. Christofferson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow up on that last point, I mean, ROI is important, but I have to say that in the purpose of this audit, it's the fairness that's the issue. This has reinforced sort of the street level, as Mr. Lutley has alluded to, the street level opinion that if you've got offshore accounts and you've got enough money and you've got enough high-powered accountants, you're going to do okay. But if you're a little guy, easy to push around, easy to take their wage, guarantee their wages, it just feels like it's easy to push the little guy around. And if you've got all the protection in the world that money will buy you, even in Canada, that still sings. Now, I'm glad to hear what you're saying, that there's some change. You know, we're going to be back. We're going to check that. But this fairness element has got to be reinforced throughout. And we need to dispel this feeling by Canadians that the lower you are on the socioeconomic scale, the more outfits like Revenue Canada are going to push you around and ignore your rights. And that has to be a concern for you, I hope. I want to pick up where Mr. Kelly, Chair, if you'll allow me, where Mr. Kelly went and just drill down a little further, and Mr. Aria touched on it as well. And I'm referencing page 16, 7.82. Budget 217 invested that $524 million over 5 years to reduce tax evasion and improve tax compliance. I'll just go on to the report. It says the investment was to fund new initiatives and extend existing programs to ensure an equitable tax system for all Canadians. But the Auditor General found, however, in the next 7.83, however, we determined that the agency could not track the exact amount of additional revenue resulting from this funding. And it goes on to say, instead, the agency used a proportional. And I've heard your arguments and your submissions, but when it doesn't pass the AG, for us, it doesn't work. So the first thing I want to do is ask Mr. Bartlett to describe the difference between what the agency said in terms of how they're monitoring the return on that investment versus what you think ought to be done and why you believe their argument doesn't hold water.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So basically, sorry, Mr. Chair, thank you. So basically in the report, as you pointed out in paragraph 783, we talk about the fact that there's no exact measurement of the additional revenues that are generated by the compliance activities. The agency used a prorated approach to calculate the amount. So we do not see specifically an exact amount or the dollars that are collected or returned to the agency. So basically, what the agency told us as well is that they found that the tracking that they had established was too cumbersome and complex. We felt that they should reassess that and then consider other potential measures to come down with a more exact measurement specifically to show what is the return or what the dollars that are coming back, as opposed to go with specifically an estimate.
So is it fair to say that you think that a different approach would result in a more accurate reflection?
Mr. Chair, we can't really state what it is, the approach, but we did recommend, as I said, that they should reassess or assess what type of other measure they could consider. So I believe, yes, there is probably another way of doing this,
okay,
and for the agency to explore.
Very
Mr.
good.
Chair.
Now, here's where I want to go. And Mr. Kelly touched on it too. In the agency's response, and I boxed this, agreed, as always, while both the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat and the Department of Finance Canada are satisfied with the Canada Revenue Agency's current reporting methodology, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to take this problem one more step away. Why is it that the Treasury Board and the Department of Finance, but more importantly the Treasury Board, which are the ones that the agency has to be accountable for in terms of ensuring they follow government policy, if I'm reading this correctly, why are they saying what you're doing is okay, but you're not?
Basically, we did not, as part of this audit, speak to the Treasury Board specifically or the Finance Department. The agency gave us some documentation that explained the position of these two organizations specifically, so we did not assess and try to understand specifically why Treasury Board as well as the Finance Department agreed with that approach.
I don't normally do this very often, but could I ask why? Because it seems to me that's a logical extension of what you're doing. If you find the agency isn't doing something as well as they could to be transparent and accountable and accurate, but they tell you that Treasury Board gave us a sign-off, why didn't you go to Treasury Board and say, hey, how come you're telling them this is okay when we think they can up their game? I'm just curious why you didn't take that step.
So, Mr. Chair, basically, these two organizations were not part of the scope of this audit, so we would have needed to include them at the beginning of the audit specifically to either consult them or audit these organizations specifically. So
it was outside the scope.
It was outside the
parameter of what you originally.
Yes.
Maybe that should have been looked at a little. I just have to say, Chair, I'm going to be, I know I'm done, but in our report writing, I'm going to be seeking an answer from Treasury Board, or at least urging colleagues to ask Treasury Board, why are they saying something's okay? Because I can get the agency to some degree is off the hook when Treasury Board says, yeah, we like the way you're doing it. Then the Auditor General comes along and says to the Commission, we don't think that that's as good as it can be. You could up your game here. But we're still left with Treasury Board, which is a higher body, saying, yeah, we're okay with it. Seems to me that Treasury Board's got some questions that they should be answering to. I'm assuming, am I out of town?
Yeah, about 3 minutes ago.
Yeah, I thought so. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Christopherson. Mr. Kelly, then Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sarai is on there.
All right, okay. I still have the floor.
Go ahead,
Chair.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. the issue of fairness, I completely agree with Mr. Christofferson about the how fundamental fairness is critical to the system being able to function. That Canadians need to believe that they are being treated fairly by the agency, or they will not feel compelled to comply with the law if they don't believe that they are being treated fairly, and it is incredibly important. But the other thing that's also important, perhaps equally important, is that the agency is accurate in its work, and the agency is not a for-profit corporation or enterprise where the goal is actually just to simply collect as much as you can. The goal is to collect exactly the right amount, the correct amount that a taxpayer owes, not more, not less. So, consistency in, first question then about accuracy. You note that the majority of those that file objections find that the objection is sustained, either wholly or in part in favor of the taxpayer. What percentage of overall assessments, or not assessments, but reviews or audits are objected? You said 60% are in favor of the taxpayer. What do you know the percentage? I just want that quick answer. If you
I don't know that particular percentage. I remember the 60%, which came up in the context of the Auditor General's report. But in terms of audits that go to objection, I don't off the top of my head have that figure unless Ted does.
We can get that offline. The key point would be it varies tremendously from payroll audits and regular filers down at 5 or 10% to multinationals where it's close to 100% take us to court.
Okay, thank you. Now, on fairness, the issue of fairness and consistency, it's going to be, I'm certain, quite troubling to any Canadian tax filer that reads this report to know that there are inconsistent applications of penalties where delay is actually a function of the agency itself not responding on a timely basis, or losing information, or in any way not executing its own functions properly. That's a really troubling revelation through this report. I'd like perhaps to know what is happening right now to make sure that if you screw up as an agency, that there is that Canadian taxpayers are not going to be penalized when you make a mistake.
Hamilton.
Yes, no, it's a very good point. I'm going to just come back to where you started. Yes, fairness is very, very important, and we talked about returns on investment, but it is fairly applying the tax. That's what we need to do at CRA, and you're absolutely right when you say not to get as much as one possibly could or as little as one could, but to get the right amount for that right circumstance. So that's obviously key for us, and we're trying to put in place systems across the whole organization, across the diverse set of taxpayers that take us there. On the issue of where we can waive penalties and interest and where that may have been inconsistent, that is something that we need to take a careful look at, and we've agreed in the Auditor General's report. I would say that one of the things that it's a symptom of, or a potential symptom of, something that we are trying to address within the agency, is sometimes our operation in silos, because it's a big place, and we can find ourselves from time to time operating in one silo here that isn't as connected as it needs to be with others. And that's been something that I've been pushing since the time I've been here. We're making progress, but you can see this happen sometimes where a silo type approach gives us the wrong result. And so we are very serious about trying to make sure that we have a better integrated approach across the agency. That's what we're trying to do with our Chief Service Officer. That's what we're trying to do through some of our work.
Commissioner, if I may repeat the question, it was, what are you doing right now to ensure that a Canadian will not be penalized when you have made the mistake?
Well, what we are doing right now, Mr. Chair, is analyzing the cases that we know about where that might have happened, understanding them, and making sure that we are communicating with our people. These are the rules. We'll look at whether we've got the right policies and procedures.
Though you doubt
so
that
we
happens.
are in the process of fixing that.
Okay. Are we? Your answer there was phrased in a way that you doubted that this happened, that if it may happen. I mean, the Auditor General said it does happen.
I didn't mean to imply that it may. I accept the fact that it has happened and that we need to be on top of it. I'm just saying I need to look at the cases, or we as an agency need to look at the cases where it did happen, understand them, and figure out how we can fix them.
That's good.
No, I'm not disputing that it can happen.
Because we're looking for, we're looking for remedies. We take the action plan and your response and we build on that. But I think Mr. Kelly's question is a fair one. Like right now, what can we do where we can see a difference right now? What about an amendment to the Taxpayer Bill of Rights to have interest, etc., automatically waived when the CRA fails to meet set time limits? Would you support something like that? I mean, what about if money is owed to CRA, that those, and yet CRA isn't meeting time limits, that interest is waived across the board. If it works the other way, that there's actually a penalty, in some regards, so that CRA feels the crunch. Would you accept something like that?
I mean, Mr. Chair, I'm not really in a position to accept or reject particular ideas right now. We could take a look at them and see what we can do, and that's the process that we're in at the moment. But as you know, we operate in a fairly complicated space, and we just need to make sure we understand the full implications of anything that we might change. So I'm happy. We are looking at it, happy to take a look at it more, but I know that Ted was looking to jump in with maybe a little bit more tangible response.
We're pretty well out of time. I looked up the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights here. There's 16 points to it, very clearly, and I so much appreciated Mr. Area giving us a little bit of an example, because we've all had those types of examples. I've had shoe boxes brought into my constituency office of paperwork so that our staff could kind of pour through this before it went to CRA, and I mean, then you get the calls of timelines not being met, and I guess maybe one other question is, in some ways, the OAG is asking you to set these time limits, making them very clear. But if there's other parts of the Bill of Rights that isn't being met, I wonder what good sometimes timelines are if the whole principle of the Bill of Rights isn't being met. But anyway, our time is up. But what? Yeah, no, that wasn't the concluding. I still have Mr. Sarai and Mendes. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Sarai.
Thank you, Chair. This question is for the Commissioner, but perhaps the Auditor General's office might want to take heed if it hasn't been looked at in this round. My riding Surrey Centre from British Columbia, Vancouver, where high home prices are a huge factor. A lot of media reports have been focusing on offshore money coming in and homes being bought worth millions and millions of dollars by students, housewives, etc., with no significant tax income. And I see you've been doing a lot of audits and perhaps a lot of the larger corporations, multinationals, but there was a study done by the provincial government a few years back that showed almost $1 billion a month coming into the country just in residential real estate in Lower Mainland. That wasn't even commercial, that wasn't going outside of Greater Vancouver, that was simply residential real estate. I think it was over $10 billion, $890 million a month that was coming in. Astronomical numbers. Has the office, the CRA office, looked into net worth audits or any of those nature, and how much so have they done? Have they recovered any funds from those? And I'm not making this in a stereotypical manner that anyone bringing offshore money is bad, but those that are not reporting their incomes and not legally bringing in those means, those funds, those are what I'm particularly concerned about.
Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will actually ask Ted to elaborate. I think as he mentioned earlier, this is one of the areas where we are focusing additional effort, real estate transactions in Vancouver in this particular case. And I would say that it's part of, we talked about fairness and how we try to make the tax system resonate as being fair for others. We are looking at places where there are risks, and part of what we're doing with the additional people that we hire, the additional analytic tools, data, is doing a better job of risk assessing. And we think that through those sophisticated techniques, we will actually be able to focus on the areas where our energy can be best deployed for the good of all the Canadians, and that they can see that this is a fairer tax system where we're focused on risks. So we are focusing additional effort in that area. Indeed, we do publish on our website statistics about what we're doing, and not just in Vancouver, but in Toronto as a result of our real estate audits. But I'll let Ted maybe just explain briefly the point you raised.
So on the real estate, again, back to ROI and some of the discussion here, we've looked at thousands of files. I think we're well north of 200 million in identified tax through these projects. And I think part of the thinking was kind of the fairness of the regime and a concern of Canadians with some tax non-compliance helping fuel the situation. And so we stepped up our resources in that space. That ROI might not be as high as if we made the investment in another sector of the economy. But we thought it was important for other reasons to send a message of deterrence. And I would also mention that, some referrals to criminal investigations coming out of that work, some focus on developers. And so it's been a broad-based focus of the agency, including one neighborhood in BC where we've looked at every single home and the owner of the home and done exactly what you said, a net worth assessment. And if it is a case of a student, is that a tax compliant situation or not? And so that idea of coverage of neighborhoods where the average home is worth more than $3 million is exactly what we're trying to do. And all of that is reported on our public website. So back to the point of fairness, we are trying to report to the public. I'd like to come back to the question of taxpayer relief that was brought up and the inconsistency, though. The two important points of clarification. The first is we're talking about proactive relief. Any Canadian today, if they feel their CRA delay, can request taxpayer relief, and that will be given consideration. So if the agency does cause delays, we'll be accountable, and we will consider a taxpayer relief situation. What we're talking about is, in the OAJ audit, is proactive relief. And when we have a human auditor assigned to you, and an audit that goes on for 100 hours or 200 hours, it is the procedure of the agency to proactively consider that request, not wait for the taxpayer to ask for it. Where the OAG has pause is when it's a 5-minute interaction, an automated letter, these smaller touch situations. That's where we have to get better at thinking of putting the client at the focus and actually thinking, could we or should we do it there? Because we hadn't done it on the low touch interactions, we had done it on the high touch interactions.
Gallivan for that clarity.
Time.
Yeah, you have more time. Go ahead.
My next question would be, in terms of penalties and interest, there seems to be a discrepancy on some people waiving more interest and penalties, where other officers giving less weight. I'm surprised that there's no consistent methodology or guidelines given to officers so that everyone has the same guideline, i.e. If it's a delay due to processing of the audit itself, or is it based on medical issues? Is it certain economic drivers at the time? What are those guidelines? And if so, if we have them, then why are they not being applied evenly across the board?
So it starts with the legislation. It's a fairly broad. It says the minister may. Kind of stops there. So the agency does have criteria. They do have procedures to follow, but they have to. We want to and have to leave room for judgment. These requests are subject to judicial review. And because the law allows for this discretionary waiving of penalty and interest, we can't prescribe it's exactly 6 days for a bank balance, it's exactly 25 days if there's a flood. we have to, and I think we want to, leave it to the discretion of individual auditors to think about the client, put the taxpayer at the center of the decision, and make a judgment that's particular to the circumstances of that taxpayer.
I'm fine with that. What concerns me is what's sensitive to one adjuster versus another. That's my issue. One might be much more sensitive to a flood or a health issue, while another might be super hard and say, I don't give a damn if you had a heart attack, if your husband was in the hospital, or if you had a flood and you had to deal with it. And I just care about my taxes. It's just how does the adjuster given guidelines on how to weight those issues?
And that's why our own internal audit and bringing to our attention this risk of inconsistency led us to clarify, or need to clarify, the guidelines, specifically, for example, in the financial institution delays. And so what we'll do is we'll put in examples. This is clearly a serious situation. This is a less serious situation. So you're right. We can always improve and tighten the guidance. The caveat I was leaving is we just can't prescribe it. It can't be a formula. We definitely, I think, need CRA officials to exercise their judgment, because we want to avoid the types of situations that you heard about from your colleague where somebody waits an unacceptable period of time. We want to have them to have some discretion, even at the risk of having some inconsistency.
Thank you, Mr. Gallivan. Thank you, Mr. Sarai. Mr. Christopherson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate another round. I just want to say to Mr. Gallivan that I really liked what I heard when you said about being proactive with the smaller amounts. I think if there's an example of exactly what we are talking about, and I thank Mr. Sarai for focusing on that, that's the thing about unfairness, is that on the one hand, there's lots of money, and part of the process is we'll take a look and see if you should get some of that back. And on the smaller stuff, again, the little guy, the one that's easy to push around, we won't do that. And just introducing that element of fairness is really the key, at least for me, is that's what's missing is fairness. And as you know, that's a major Canadian trait, is that we try and we like to think that we're fair-minded people. And I think people have a right to expect that from a powerful, important, potentially intrusive agency like the one that you both operate. So I thank you for that. That was good news. Page 7 and 7.41, again, this speaks directly to what we were just talking about. We found that agency policies and procedures define circumstances to waive or cancel interest, but did not define the period of time to be an undue delay. The agency left this to the auditor's discretion. And anytime there's discretion, there is the opportunity for corruption. So my question actually is to the Auditor General, the Auditor General's office. I would assume, or you would have said something, but I just want to reinforce it, that you found absolutely no evidence or concern around potential corruption on the part of individuals who have the power to waive big amounts of money that someone either pays or doesn't have to pay. Please just give me some assurances.
Mr. Chair, if the team had found that, we would have reported it.
So you found no evidence whatsoever?
No evidence.
Okay, I just wanted that on the record. I suspected that, but my question is this, the last one, Chair. All these inconsistencies obviously are big enough to form the focal point of an Auditor General report. It doesn't get much bigger than that. Where were and I'm going to ask maybe both entities to respond to this. Where were the internal audit committees? Why didn't they find this before the AG had to roll in and find it? So I'm going to ask Mr. Hamilton why, and then I'm going to ask Mr. Bartlett to just comment on what you found when you looked at the internal audit function. I'm assuming that you had to touch on that. So, Mr. Hamilton, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think, as I referenced earlier, part of our goal is to not wait till the AG points something out to us, but to actually proactively uncover it. And I think this is a good example. If we look, you were at 7.41. If we go down to 7.43, we see a reference to our internal audit in this area where we had already done some work. to uncover this issue. We haven't solved it yet, but it was an area where we worried, as I talked about earlier, that we may be leaving a little bit too much scope for inconsistency. It's true, as Ted said, we can't necessarily prescribe everything, but we can be much clearer with our employees about what our expectations are, what the guidelines are. And so we have committed here to do that. And this was something that we found in our internal audit. And my hope going forward is that we find more and more of those things internally that can then be verified or checked or elaborated on by the Auditor General. So this is actually one example. I wish we didn't have the problem, but we did uncover the problem, and we agree with the Auditor General.
So if I'm clear, you're suggesting that your internal audit committees did identify some of these things, but just not everything. So will you be upping the game of the audit committees too to make sure that they can do a more comprehensive? Because you're right, in a perfect world, you wouldn't make any mistakes. If you did make any mistakes, your internal audit committee would find it, and in a worst case, they don't, and luckily the AG rolls in. So I assume that you're going to try to beef up that capacity so that they would find more of these kind of things, and because they slip through the cracks of your audit committee, obviously.
Yeah, and I think, to be fair, I believe we have one of the best internal audit shops I've seen. We actually have a board of a management board that has directors and an audit committee. So we can always up our game for sure. But I think the group does a pretty good job of looking at the agency, looking at the risks that we face and our risk tolerances, and deciding where to focus their efforts. This one is one they identified. Could we do a better job of making sure that we identify all of the high-risk areas? Probably yes, but I would say that it is generally a high-functioning internal audit team. I don't know if the AG would agree with that or not, but that's my perception of it. And we do, though, need to think about how do we proactively uncover those areas that are high risk or could become high profile.
Or unfair.
Up
yes,
to game.
Mr. Bartlett, if you would please. And I'm done, Chair.
Mr. Bartlett? Mr. Dompierre.
Mr. Chair, just to echo what Mr. Hamilton just said, like for example, we are attending the audit committee and we are sitting and hearing these audits that are presented. And one example, as it's been mentioned in paragraph 746, when they did an audit specifically on the taxpayers' relief. So we did look at that audit. We did look at the methodology they use, and we did identify that they had done a good job in identifying some of these inconsistencies. So therefore, I think when we have reports like that, we can use these reports and quote them as we did in this report.
Just to make sure I understand, layperson's words. Basically, you're agreeing with Mr. Hamilton that they do a pretty good job. They caught some of this stuff. They were looking at it. Obviously, they didn't get it all. You did. So I think it's still fair to say that they could do a better job because some of it fell through. But you are acknowledging that on some of these things they did catch it. And let's hear it specifically, because I think the answer is yes. I like to end on a positive. I actually do. What I heard was that Mr. Hamilton thought that they had a pretty top-flight internal audit process. You feel the same way?
I will always feel the same way.
Good to hear.
Mr. Chair, and I think we complement each other as an organization. They do a certain audit based on their own risk and assessment, and we try to do other audits that are either not duplicating, but at least looking at similar issues. And at the end, we and they produce some good results.
Very good. Good to hear. Thank you, Chair.
On that, does their internal audit ever get counsel from an Auditor General? Is that a conflict, or is that good practice, or like is there ever like your internal audit, is that from CRA people, or do you bring in contract? You have an internal, meaning CRA does it. Do you ever do a council with the OAG and say this is problematic, or I don't know, whatever they may do on their internal? Is there ever consultation back with the OAG?
Mr. Chair, I'll take a stab at answering that. It is our internal audit is CRA employees team that reports to me and to the audit committee of the board. And there is a fair amount of back and forth with the Auditor General, so I would say consultation about particular issues, things they might see or things that we're seeing. I'm not sure if I'd go so far to say we're seeking their advice on a particular issue, but that may have happened in the past I don't know. I'll ask the AG if they know, or otherwise I can check back in. But I would characterize it as two independent groups that do try to coordinate where possible, so we're not duplicating each other's work. Or
thank you, thank you, Madam Mendez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to refer you all to, because I'd like this to be on the record, to a report from the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada called The Shell Game. And this is the page, How Offshore Havens, Loopholes, and Federal Cost-Cutting Undermine Tax Fairness. And it was a survey done of CRA professionals. So, and I'm just going to quote three little parts of it. I'll start my first one with an attempt at translating into French, because I'd like this to be on the record in French. And it says, and I quote,
Only 16% of professionals at the agency thinks that the CRA has the necessary audit ability to apply the law fairly throughout the country. Budget cuts in 2012 are being felt today. And I will quote this document further.
Limited resources. In 2012, sweeping budget cuts were introduced to the agency. As a result, spending levels and staff counts have yet to return to pre-2012 levels. When adjusted for inflation, a $500 million annual budget shortfall exists between 2012-13 and today. This level of underfunding doesn't make sense. Not only does tougher enforcement result in a fairer system, it also more than pays for itself. The Finance Department's own numbers show a $10 return for every dollar invested in combating international tax evasion and aggressive tax avoidance. And the final quote, when asked in our survey, over 8 out of 10 CRA tax professionals, so 81%, who responded agreed that tax credits, tax exemptions, and tax loopholes disproportionately benefit corporations and wealthy Canadians compared to average Canadians. And if I may get your reactions on these quotes, if you were able to listen to them, I would really be grateful, because I think from the professionals themselves, we have a measure of the challenges that they face also to reach this fairness that we want for the Canadian taxpayer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll respond to some of that. And obviously, that was a survey of one of our unions within the agency, or we have a part of that union. So I take it seriously when our employees are surveyed and voice those opinions. I guess what I would say is we try to do the best job we can at the agency with the money that we are given. And frankly, as we've talked about in this session, recently we have received additional money largely for compliance, but also to increase services. But with that money that we have at our disposal, we try to make the best use out of it, that not just to generate additional money, as we have talked about earlier, for the government, but also to do so in a fair way, to look at our procedures and ensure that we're collecting that right dollar of tax, not too much, not too little. So I think I take the point that with more money, maybe we could do more audits, we could do more activity. But my job is to make sure that with the money that we have, we are doing an efficient job. We are taking maximum use of technology, making the best use of the data that we have, hiring the best people, but also instilling in the audit community that, yes, there's a job to go out and generate money through audit to make sure we're getting the right amount, but there's also a service element in what we do. And in some cases, that might even be more expensive to run than others. But that element of educating people, it's a complex tax system that we have. People can have complex business structures. We need to try to explain to them what we're doing. And so that's a part of the audit as well. So my comment on the study is, obviously, we need to make sure that we're making the best use of the money that we have to get the best tools for our people and make sure that our auditors and other employees at CRA are as well equipped as they can be to do the job that we're giving them.
Thank you. Two things. First of all, I'm going to give Mr. Massé about a minute here at the end. It was requested from the government side. There was the question about the consultation back and forth. And Mr. Dompierre, it looked like you were prepared to answer, and I kind of limited the time on the previous question. It was because it was my question. But they wanted you to have the opportunity to answer that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we do have meetings and discussion with the internal audit folks. So we do have discussion with them, either to define what it is that they're going to do in the future in terms of their own plans, and we do share our own activities that we will perform. So we do have a good collaboration with the internal audit function in order to sort of, as I said before, complement each other in terms of the way we do our work. And we are, as Mr. Hamilton said, we are independent, as they are independent in the process of their own activities. So that's just what I wanted to add, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Dompierre. Mr. Massé, to kind of finalize in a minute.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. This OAG's report is very important, and the conclusions that were written, as you've seen, but based on the questions that all my colleagues have asked, we find that this is very important, this report. So my question is for the CRA and its representatives. What is the CRA's management doing to share the conclusions of this report and explain them? Often, as you said earlier, there are 40,000 public servants in your department, and obviously sometimes these public servants are focused on doing all the work that they have to do. So I'd like to know what you are doing, what have you done, and what do you plan to do to make sure that these 40,000 public servants at the CRA are aware of the important results of this report and of the game plan that you are going to implement. Yes, this is a challenge for us with 40,000 public servants. We have to make sure that the message is clear and consistent throughout the organization. And I've spent a lot of time speaking with everyone across the country to make sure the message is clear. It's important for Canadians to trust our system. It's also important that we are consistently applying our rules and regulations. So it's very important for me to do this. I've put a lot of emphasis on the agency's culture, its culture of service. Even for auditors, it's really important for the agency, and as I said, recently, we have to have a good relationship with taxpayers. Right from the start, we have to have dialogue. There has to be education, and if we don't have an agreement, we have to strengthen some areas. So it's important for us to properly communicate changes within the CRA, and we also have to respect the recommendations of the OAG. And we did agree with these recommendations. I would just like to say we sent an email to all employees, and you'll see in the action plan, we do plan to consult with them to make sure they're aware of the situation. We don't just want to change the procedures, but we want to explain them, and that's in the action plan. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
And I want to thank all our guests from the OAG and from CRA for being here today, and we wish you well as you're trying to comply with the action plan and meet some of these time deadlines. It's frustrating to the average Canadian anytime they get a call or a letter from CRA. In fact, you know, with the scams that are going on out there now, we get people calling in being scammed over the phone, you know, from who they think are CRA, and it really puts everybody kind of into a, you know, into a mode of uncertainty and panic. And so complying with CRA, I think most Canadians understand the importance of it, but they expect to be treated fairly. And we just wish you all the best as you try to meet these, and we thank the Auditor General's Office for another audit well done. Thank you, committee. We're now adjourned.